Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Thorne, and for the past 2 decades I've spent my career in the lab, studying the way cells divide, mutate, and sometimes turn against us. Tonight, I'm not here to talk about rare exposures or exotic toxins. I'm here to talk about something far more unsettling, something sitting in your kitchen cabinet right now, something you probably ate today. Because here's the truth, the food industry doesn't want printed on a label. The danger isn't always in what's foreign to your body. Sometimes it's in what's become familiar. The everyday, harmless foods we reach for out of habit, convenience, or comfort. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through what the research actually shows about one common dietary pattern, why certain processes in our food may be quietly fueling inflammation and cellular damage, and, most importantly, what you can do about it starting tonight. This isn't about fear. It's about awareness. Because the first step to protecting yourself is knowing what you're really up against. For decades, we've been told that cancer risk comes down to genetics, or bad luck, or exposure to obvious toxins like cigarette smoke or radiation. And while those factors matter, there's a quieter, more pervasive threat that rarely gets the same attention: the sheer volume of ultra-processed food that has become the backbone of the modern diet. Walk into any grocery store today, and the vast majority of what lines those shelves isn't really food in the traditional sense. It's food-like substances, reconstructed, stripped down, and rebuilt with additives, preservatives, emulsifiers, artificial flavors, and industrial seasoning agents designed for one purpose: to make you keep eating. Packaged snacks, sugary cereals, frozen ready meals, sodas, flavored yogurts, deli meats, instant noodles. These aren't occasional indulgences anymore. For most people, they've become dietary staples, consumed multiple times a day, every single day. Here's what the research is increasingly pointing to. These foods don't just lack nutrients. They actively provoke a low-grade, chronic inflammatory response in the body. Unlike acute inflammation, the kind that helps you heal from a cut or fight off an infection, chronic inflammation is a slow burn. It doesn't announce itself with pain or fever. It simmers quietly in the background, day after day, year after year, damaging tissue and disrupting normal cellular signaling. And chronic inflammation is not a bystander in the story of cancer. It's increasingly understood to be an active participant. When your immune system is in a constant state of low-level alert, cells are exposed to a steady stream of inflammatory molecules, cytokines, free radicals, reactive oxygen species that can damage DNA over time. Damaged DNA that isn't properly repaired is exactly the kind of error that can, in rare but real cases, set the stage for a normal cell to begin behaving abnormally. What makes ultra-processed foods particularly concerning is the combination of factors packed into a single bite. It's rarely just one ingredient at fault. It's the convergence of refined carbohydrates, industrial seed oils, synthetic additives, and chemical preservatives all interacting with your gut lining, your metabolism, and your immune system simultaneously. Many of these products are also engineered to bypass your body's natural satiety signals, meaning you consume more calories, more sugar, and more of these inflammatory compounds than your body was ever designed to process in a single day. There's also the matter of what's missing. Whole, unprocessed foods come bundled with fiber, antioxidants, and micronutrients that actively help your body manage inflammation and repair cellular damage. Strip those away, which is precisely what industrial processing does, and you're left with calorie-dense, nutrient-poor products that offer your cells little defense against the very damage they're contributing to. This is why I find it so important to reframe the conversation. We tend to think of cancer risk in terms of dramatic exposures, a single toxic chemical, a rare environmental hazard, but what the emerging science suggests is something far more mundane and in some ways more troubling. It's not one bad meal. It's the cumulative weight of thousands of small, seemingly insignificant choices, repeated daily, that quietly shift your internal environment toward one that's more hospitable to disease. The good news buried inside all of this is that unlike genetics, diet is something you actually have control over. Every meal is a small decision point. A chance to either add to that inflammatory burden or to give your body the tools it needs to keep those processes in check. It doesn't require perfection. It requires awareness of just how much of what we casually call food today is a product of a lab and a factory line, not a farm. Sugar has a peculiar reputation in our culture. We treat it as a treat, a reward, a small indulgence that couldn't possibly carry the weight of something as serious as cancer. But when you look past the marketing and into the actual biology of how sugar behaves inside the human body, a very different picture starts to emerge, one that deserves far more scrutiny than it currently gets. Every time you consume sugar, whether it's the obvious kind in a soda or dessert, or the hidden kind tucked into sauces, breads, and healthy snack bars, your body responds by releasing insulin. Insulin's job is to usher glucose out of your bloodstream and into your cells for energy. This is a normal, necessary process. The problem arises when this process happens over and over, dozens of times a day, day after day, for years on end, as is the case with the modern high-sugar diet. Chronically elevated insulin doesn't just regulate blood sugar, it also acts as a growth signal. Insulin and a related hormone called insulin-like growth factor 1, or IGF-1, tell cells throughout the body to grow, divide, and multiply. In a healthy, balanced system, this is tightly controlled. But when insulin levels are perpetually elevated because of a diet saturated in refined sugar, that growth signal becomes persistent rather than occasional. And persistent growth signaling is precisely the kind of environment in which abnormal cells, the kind that would otherwise be caught and eliminated by the body's own surveillance systems, can find an opportunity to survive, multiply, and eventually escape control. This connects to something researchers have observed at the cellular level for nearly a century. Many cancer cells display an unusually high appetite for glucose. They rely heavily on a process called glycolysis to fuel their rapid division, consuming sugar at rates far beyond what normal, healthy cells require. This phenomenon, often referred to in scientific literature as the Warburg effect, suggests that abnormal cells aren't just tolerant of a sugar-rich environment. They may be uniquely positioned to exploit it. A bloodstream that is frequently flooded with glucose isn't a neutral backdrop. It may function as fuel for exactly the kind of runaway cellular activity we're trying to prevent. Beyond the direct growth signaling pathway, chronic sugar intake also drives another dangerous cascade: obesity and metabolic dysfunction. Excess sugar that isn't immediately used for energy gets converted and stored as fat, particularly visceral fat around the abdominal organs. This isn't inert storage tissue. Visceral fat is metabolically active, and it secretes its own inflammatory signals and hormones that further disrupt the body's normal regulatory systems. It's a feedback loop. Sugar drives fat storage drives inflammation, and inflammation compounds the cellular stress already being caused by elevated insulin and glucose. What makes this especially difficult to combat is how invisible the sugar problem often is. Most people picture a candy bar or a slice of cake when they think of sugar intake. But the modern food supply has quietly saturated nearly every category of packaged food with added sugars: pasta sauces, salad dressings, bread, granola, flavored coffee drinks, and condiments most people would never suspect. This means many people are consuming far more sugar than they realize, subjecting their bodies to that same insulin surge and growth signaling cascade multiple times throughout the day without ever reaching for anything that looks like a dessert. There's also a psychological dimension worth acknowledging. Sugar is specifically engineered into many processed products to trigger dopamine release in the brain, creating patterns of craving and consumption that operate below the level of conscious choice. This isn't a matter of willpower alone, it's a matter of understanding that the food industry has built products designed to keep you reaching for more, regardless of what your body actually needs. When you put these pieces together, the chronic insulin elevation, the direct fuel source for rapidly dividing cells, the visceral fat and inflammatory cascade, and the hidden ubiquity of sugar throughout the food supply, what emerges is not a single smoking gun, but a sustained compounding biological pressure. It's a pressure that builds quietly, meal after meal, largely unnoticed, until the cumulative effect on the body's cellular environment becomes significant. If sugar and processed food represent a slow, cumulative pressure on the body, the way we cook our food introduces a different kind of risk entirely, one that's direct, chemical, and often hiding in plain sight on the dinner plate. I'm talking about what happens when meat meets high heat, particularly through grilling, frying, and charring, cooking methods so common that most of us have never thought twice about them. When meat, especially red meat and processed meat, is cooked at high temperatures, particularly over an open flame or a very hot pan, two distinct classes of chemical compounds can form. The first are called heterocyclic amines, or HCAs. These form when amino acids, sugars, and creatine, all naturally present in muscle meat, react to intense heat. The second are polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs, which form when fat and juices drip onto an open flame or hot surface, creating smoke that then coats the surface of the food. Both HCAs and PAHs have been studied extensively, and both have demonstrated the ability to damage DNA in laboratory and animal studies. What makes this particularly relevant to a discussion about cancer is how these compounds behave once they're inside the body. HCAs and PAHs aren't inert. They get metabolized by enzymes in the liver and other tissues, and during that metabolic process, they can be converted into reactive intermediates that bind directly to DNA, forming what researchers call DNA adducts. A DNA adduct is essentially a chemical distortion of the genetic code, a place where the DNA strand has been altered in a way that can interfere with normal replication. If the body's repair mechanisms fail to catch and correct that distortion before a cell divides, the error gets copied forward, potentially setting off a chain of mutations that accumulate over time. The char marks so many of us associate with a properly grilled steak or burger, that deep blackened crust, are often the most concentrated source of these compounds. The longer meat cooks, the higher the temperature and the more direct contact with flame or smoke, the greater the concentration of HCAs and PAHs that form on its surface. This means the very cooking techniques often prized for flavor, the sear, the char, the smoky crust, are frequently the ones generating the highest chemical burden. Processed meats add another layer of complexity to this picture. Bacon, sausages, hot dogs, and deli meats are frequently cured with nitrates and nitrites, compounds used to preserve color and prevent bacterial growth. Under certain conditions, particularly high-heat cooking, these compounds can react with amines naturally present in meat to form nitrosamines, another class of compounds that has drawn significant attention in cancer research for its DNA-damaging potential. This is part of why processed meat, independent of red meat in general, has been the subject of such intense scientific scrutiny. It's worth pausing here to note that this isn't about a single meal triggering disease. The body has remarkable repair mechanisms, and occasional exposure to these compounds is something our systems are generally equipped to handle. The concern arises from frequency and cumulative exposure, the reality that for many people, grilled, fried, or charred meat isn't an occasional event, but a weekly, sometimes daily dietary pattern. Combine that with marinades, sauces, and seasoning blends that often contain their own sugars and processed ingredients, and you have multiple risk factors converging on the same plate. There's also a socioeconomic and cultural layer worth acknowledging. Grilling and frying are deeply embedded in food traditions across the world, tied to celebration, family, and comfort. This isn't about vilifying entire cuisines or cultural practices. It's about understanding the underlying chemistry so that informed choices can be made about cooking methods, frequency, and preparation techniques without requiring anyone to abandon the foods they love entirely. What the research consistently points to is a dose and frequency relationship rather than a single dangerous ingredient. Marinating meat before cooking, for instance, has been shown in some studies to reduce HCA formation. Cooking at lower temperatures, avoiding direct flame contact, and trimming charred portions before eating are all practical adjustments that can meaningfully reduce the chemical load introduced through this pathway, even while keeping these foods part of a regular diet. For most of the 20th century, when we talked about digestion, we talked about it in fairly simple terms. Food goes in, nutrients get absorbed, waste goes out. What we've come to understand more recently is that this picture leaves out one of the most influential systems in the entire body, the trillions of bacteria, fungi, and other microorganisms living in your gut, collectively known as the microbiome. And increasingly, researchers are recognizing that this hidden ecosystem plays a far more direct role in cancer risk than anyone previously suspected. Your gut isn't just a digestive tube. It's home to an estimated 30 to 40 trillion microbial cells, forming a complex, interconnected community that influences digestion, hormone regulation, and, critically, immune function. In fact, somewhere between 60 and 70% of your entire immune system resides in and around the gut. This means the state of your gut bacteria isn't just about digestion or bloating. It's directly tied to how well your body identifies and eliminates abnormal cells before they have the chance to become a real problem. Here's where diet enters the picture. A healthy, diverse microbiome, one rich in beneficial bacterial species, thrives on fiber, plant diversity, and whole, unprocessed foods. These bacteria ferment fiber into compounds called short-chain fatty acids, including one called butyrate, which serves as a primary fuel source for the cells lining your colon. Butyrate does something remarkable. It helps maintain the integrity of the gut lining, reduces inflammation, and has even been shown in laboratory studies to encourage abnormal cells to undergo apoptosis, essentially programmed self-destruction, before they can proliferate. Now consider what happens when the modern diet, heavy in processed food, sugar, and low in fiber, is introduced into this system day after day. Beneficial fiber-fermenting bacteria begin to starve, quite literally, from lack of the fuel they need to thrive. In their place, opportunistic and often inflammatory bacterial species begin to flourish, particularly those that thrive on sugar and fat rather than fiber. This shift, referred to in research circles as dysbiosis, represents a fundamental imbalance in the gut ecosystem, and it doesn't stay contained to the gut. One of the most concerning consequences of dysbiosis is something researchers call increased intestinal permeability, more commonly known as leaky gut. The lining of a healthy gut is tightly sealed, allowing nutrients through while keeping bacteria, toxins, and undigested food particles contained. When the microbiome is thrown out of balance, that lining can become compromised, allowing bacterial fragments and inflammatory compounds to leak into the bloodstream. Your immune system, sensing this breach, mounts a chronic inflammatory response, the same kind of persistent, low-grade inflammation that we've already discussed as a driver of cellular damage and mutation. There's also a more direct mechanism worth understanding. Certain bacterial species that flourish under dysbiotic conditions are capable of producing genotoxins, compounds that directly damage the DNA of the cells lining the colon. One particularly well-studied example involves certain strains of E. coli that produce a toxin capable of inducing DNA damage in colon cells upon prolonged exposure. This isn't a theoretical concern confined to petri dishes. Researchers have found meaningful associations between the presence of these bacterial strains and colorectal tissue changes in human studies. The gut microbiome also plays a lesser-known role in hormone regulation, particularly estrogen metabolism, through a collection of bacteria sometimes referred to as the estrobolome. When this system is disrupted by poor diet, it can alter circulating hormone levels in ways that have been linked in ongoing research to hormone-sensitive tissue changes elsewhere in the body. A reminder that gut health doesn't just influence the colon, but potentially far more distant tissues as well. What's particularly striking about the microbiome's role in this story is how quickly it responds to dietary change. Unlike genetic risk factors, which are fixed from birth, The composition of your gut bacteria can shift measurably within days of a change in diet. A shift toward more fiber, fermented foods, and plant diversity can begin repopulating beneficial bacterial colonies rapidly, while a diet dominated by sugar and processed food can shift that same ecosystem toward dysbiosis in a comparably short window. This responsiveness means the gut represents one of the most immediate, modifiable points of leverage in the entire conversation about diet and cellular health. We've covered a lot of ground tonight: the inflammatory burden of processed food, the growth-signaling danger of chronic sugar intake, the DNA-damaging compounds hidden in high-heat cooking, and the delicate ecosystem of the gut microbiome that quietly governs so much of our defense against disease. None of this is meant to frighten you into giving up every food you love. It's meant to arm you with knowledge, because the body you have tomorrow is being shaped by the choices you make today, one meal at a time. Small, consistent changes matter more than perfection ever will. Add more fiber. Choose whole foods when you can. Rethink how often that char hits your plate. Your cells are listening to everything you feed them. If this information mattered to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop your thoughts or questions in the comments below, and subscribe for more evidence-based conversations on the science of staying healthy. Thank you for spending this time with me.